Okay. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Savannah Book Festival's next event in the 2021 virtual season. My name is Harrison Scott Key. I live here in Savannah. I know a lot of people are logging in from around the country. Some of you may remember me from the book festival in 2016 or in 2019 when I spoke about my first two books, The World's Largest Man and Congratulations, Who Are You Again? If those two books are funny, and they are supposed to be funny, and people who need medication say they are, then we have tonight's guest to blame. Dave Barry is the first funny writer I ever read. He is the first writer I ever plagiarized and ever tried my best to imitate. I am beside myself to speak with him tonight. Thank you to the Savannah Book Festival for making this possible. This is really exciting. So as everyone watching knows, Dave is an author and a columnist who wrote a nationally syndicated humor column for the Miami Herald for 236 years, for which he won a Pulitzer Prize. He's written a bajillion books, mostly nonfiction, including his latest, Lessons from Lucy, The Simple Joys of an Old Happy Dog, which was just released in paperback last week. You can purchase a copy from the festival's booksellers through the link just below this stream. Okay, so we've got an hour with the only man to win a Pulitzer Prize for writing about subjects that would get most people sent to HR. And this guy makes it look easy. So I know you guys have questions. To submit a question for Dave, please click Ask a Question on the bottom of your screen and type it in all caps. I will make sure to scream it at Dave. We will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Okay, so that's enough of that. Here we go. Welcome, Dave Barry.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for doing this, Harrison.
Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. So I guess you released this book about a year and a half ago. It just came out in paperback. Do you remember what this book is about? I guess that's my first question.
Vaguely. I'm getting old and my memory is going. That is partly what the book is about. A couple years ago, I was, as you do when you're an author, talking with my editor about what to write a book about. And I did a book on when I turned 40. Dave Barry turns 40. I did a book when I turned 50. I kind of did a book when I turned 60. So this would have been like a Dave Barry turned 70. And I really couldn't figure out how that would be radically different from any of the other Dave Barry Gets Old books. But then it was my editors. I don't know why we were talking about dogs, but I have a dog, Lucy, a wonderful dog. And she said, do something about dogs. And I said, well, I don't want to write a dog book because there's a million dog books. But anyway, I started thinking about Lucy specifically and the fact that I was turning 70 and Lucy at the same time was turning 10, which in, dog years is 70. Although I've been told that's not true, but I don't care. It's true as far as my book is concerned. In other words, Lucy and I are both getting old. And I got to thinking about how dogs handle aging and specifically how Lucy was handling aging. And I did an unusual amount of soul searching for me. I'm not a soul searcher. And it occurred to me that I was not really that happy about it, about getting older. I've written a lot of jokes about it. But when I wrote those jokes, I was like 50, and that's not, now I don't think about that as, that's when you can make jokes about getting old without having to really feel the pain. But now 70 is not that age. When you're 70, everyone thinks you're old. You can't ignore it. And I didn't like it. I didn't like some things it was doing to me. And I looked at Lucy, who doesn't care at all that she's getting old, as dogs don't about many things that we care about. And I decided to write a book about specifically what it is that dogs do that make them happy that I wasn't doing, that would make me happy. Things that dogs do or don't do that keep them in the kind of dog mode they're always in, where they don't ever get down. They just always seem to be up for whatever, And so I wrote about that. I don't want to say it's a self-help book. I've never written a self-help book. Most of the time when people read my books, they come away thinking that didn't help me at all, or I'm actually stupider for having read that book. That's generally but this is as close as I've ever come. I like to say before we even get into any of the actual things I say in the book, there's not one thing that I discovered or wrote about that everybody doesn't already know. It's all really obvious. And that's kind of in the end, the secret. Dogs are not that smart. They're just not, but they know certain simple things that work really well. Lucy knows these things and they do them. And that's why they're happy. But nothing I say is remotely revolutionary or insightful.
Can you talk about, in the book, you mention your feelings about self-help authors? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I've done more book tours than any living human being. I started writing books in the early 80s and wrote at least one book a year for many, many years. And I always went on a book tour. And back in the early days, I'm talking in the 1980s, then everybody went on book tours. And a really popular kind of book was self-help books. They still are popular, but there used to be all these shows like AM San Antonio or AM Duluth. Every little town had a local TV station that had an AM whatever show. And if you were an author, you could get on these shows. They were desperate for individuals to appear on their shows and for free, which is what authors are really good at. And so I would be on this, endless tour of every city in America going on AM whatever. And I often find myself in the green room with self-help book authors and like diet book authors. There's so many diet books, and they all of them said that they were different from all the other diet books. But other just sort of generally how to be a happier person book. And I have never seen a more consistently unhappy, unbalanced group of human beings than these self-help book authors were. They were like always mad. As soon as they got off from telling everybody how to live and be happy, they were furious about something, their flight out or their flight in, or they weren't on as many stations as the other self-help book authors, and they'd be screaming at their publicists. So I became very cynical about self-help book authors and specifically about diet books. Because like, if diet books worked, we would be a very skinny nation today. And we are not.
Well, now that you've written a self-help book, do you feel empowered to scream and yell at people now?
No, I feel like a fraud. My only excuse is like I said, as I said at the beginning, there really isn't anything I'm saying that you couldn't pretty immediately get a 4-year-old child to agree with. So it's not like I'm coming out and saying I'm breaking new ground with this book.
So you consider yourself a dog person? That's right. Is that right?
Absolutely. I love dogs. I've always loved dogs. I've written a lot of columns about dogs. If I advise anybody who wants to go into the human writing business to get a dog and just watch what it does, and there you are.
So you grew up with dogs, so this wasn't a transition for you. You've always loved dogs and always had dogs?
Yeah. Although I had to talk my wife, Michelle, into this dog, Lucy, the current dog in my life. For the first 10 years of our marriage, Michelle adamantly refused to get a dog because, get this, she thinks they're dirty. What do you think about that, Harrison? Do you think dogs?
Well, as we were discussing earlier, I thought I was a dirty, filthy human being. And this dog that lives in my house now, this puppy, has destroyed my home and my sanity, eaten everything, including food, but not only food. It eats toys. It eats the house. I've had to repaint the inside of the home because the dog will eat the paint off of the house. We do so much laundry now because of this dog. It's disgusting. And so I guess, are you telling us that you're okay with being disgusting? Is that what you mean by being a dog person?
No, I just think you have to lower your hygiene standards a little bit. Actually, you have to lower your hygiene standards quite a bit. And like my wife, she really couldn't accept that, that it would be okay for the animal that is 1 minute licking, some part of your toilet to then come over and give you a big old friendly kiss. Now she's good with that. My wife is good with that. She accepts that. But it took a while. Mainly it was my daughter, who's now 20, but when she was little, she started very early on, haranguing. She's not a haranguer, but just keeping up the pressure to get a dog. And finally, my wife broke down, and that's where Lucy came from.
And your wife, she's turned a corner. She's accepted this.
Yeah, they have their battles. Our house is a series of zones. Some of the zones are, Lucy knows she's allowed to go into them, and some of the zones she's not allowed to go into them, but she can't help herself. When we leave the house, certain sofas call to her, Lucy, come sit on me, Lucy. And then when we get home, because dogs do know when they've broken the rules. They tell you they get real low on the floor. Like I think I wrote a column once that's saying if dogs, there would never be a dog version of like Perry Mason, because there would never be any doubt who did it. The dog would immediately confess, the guilty dog. All the other dogs would also confess. Dogs just feel guilty when anything bad has happened around them. They'll all confess. So on the Perry Mason dog show, not only would the criminal dog confess, but the prosecutor dog and the judge dog, all the jury dogs would all confess to them. So it'd be like a boring show, nothing. But anyway, so Lucy does still get on the sofas she's not allowed to get on, and Michelle still goes and gets a sticky thing and rolls them off and tells Lucy no, as if Lucy hasn't heard that a lot, many thousand times. And Michelle's tried everything. She's tried putting aluminum foil, and and it doesn't work. Lucy eventually gets to anything she wants to get into.
If Lucy's done something wrong, what does she look like? Like, what does she do?
Her appearance is the same. Lucy always looks like you just told her that her mother died. She's one of those. She's got a sad look about her, even when she's really happy. But what she does is she gets kind of lower to the floor, and comes over and basically tries to lick you in an intimate way. So it would make up. I also wrote a dog hospital. Speaking of licking, a dog hospital drama once, where when you go to the dog hospital, all the doctors gather around you, and no matter what it is, whether you have a gunshot wound to your foot, or arrow sticking out of your head, it doesn't matter. They go, we need to lick him. They all lick you, and then you're better at the dog hospital.
So you talked about her getting. I want to talk about dogs. I just want to make that very clear. I have questions about dogs.
I'm into talking about dogs.
So, have you ever tried to train a dog, like kind of train at least a little bit?
Because I'm not really strict enough. I always figure, the dog's trying, that's good enough. I think you have to be more strict than that. But I have had dogs that would, like, if you said, come here, would come to you. Lucy won't do that. The only actual thing that Lucy has been trained to do is she'll shake when you have a treat in your hand. You can get her to shake hands with you.
Oh, okay.
And then I can get her to hold still, and I can back up about a yard. That's about as far as I can go before she'll come after the treat. And then I say, here. And Lucy comes. And so that's kind of it. Beyond that, she won't do anything anybody tells her to. And I'm sure that's my fault. I'm not a good dog trainer.
How old was she? She's a rescue dog, right?
Yeah.
How old was she?
I think she's around 6 months old. She's a puppy, kind of rambunctious, jet black little puppy. Now she's very well. Yeah, you can see she's very distinguished looking. Yeah.
So, obviously, people write about dogs and how we didn't rescue the dog rescued me, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anything that Lucy has done to make you a worse person? Because it's so much about being a better person. Like, what do you do that you maybe used to do better because of her?
Well, I didn't used to leave poop on other people's yards sometimes. Well, maybe occasionally.
When you were very young.
When you have a dog, we live in a residential neighborhood, and the protocol is you have a little bag, and when your dog poops, you pick up the poop. And in this neighborhood, they have little receptacles for the dog poop. That's how it's kind of, I don't know what the word is, but that's how sophisticated we are. And I do that. I pick up the poop, and I put it in the receptacle. But if it's like suddenly, if we got all the way around the whole thing and we're a long way from the receptacles, and then's when she decides to poop and it starts pouring rain or something like that, I've been known to just leave the poop there once or twice. And I would never have done that if I didn't have a dog. Of course, I wouldn't have had to poop either. So I don't know. Other than that, I'm a better human being. No, I do think dogs make you better, because if nothing else, and this is, again, no original observations here, but you have to walk your dog. You know, you have to take care of your dog. You have to do things for your dog. The dog's not going to do for her itself. She's not going to feed herself. So you take care of her. Then yes, that's a good thing. You know, instilling that in you. Of course, it was supposed to be my daughter doing those things. So that never happened. You know, she loves Lucy and Lucy loves her. But she's off to college now, and I don't think she ever once fed Lucy.
So
I fed them both.
So this book it's obviously very funny. There's a lot of you also play the straight man at times in this book. You know, that self-help piece, like when you give those lessons, like you're being pretty straight there. Did you have any resistance to that? I mean, you've written a lot of funny books, so it's not like you felt the itch that it had to always be funny 100% of the time. But did you have any resistance to playing the straight man in this book ever?
I mean, internal resistance, myself feeling a little.
Yeah, as a writer, like, oh, this feels weird to me.
Yeah, very much. And that's kind of what I said about it. I don't write self-help books, and I felt self-conscious about that.
Right.
I've never been an advice giver. Never. And I mean, and that's not false modesty. I just don't think I know anything that anybody needs to know. I've never felt that way. It's just not my nature. And so, there were times when I was writing, you know, especially I would get to the end of each chapter. I would try to make it as funny as I could. But then in the end, I would say, this is what I think it means. And this is what I'm, going to try to do as a result of it. And then I would feel a little bit self-conscious about it and a little concerned, which is why I spend so much time stressing in there that it's not original with me. But I guess I've gotten a little more secure as a writer, and I didn't feel quite as obligated to make every single sentence wackadoodle, you know? Yeah. But it did weigh on me a little bit.
Does it feel when you write a paragraph and there's not a single punchline in the paragraph, does that feel strange to you?
Yeah, it does. I'm very conscious of when I do that, and I always think, well, it's been about 100 words here. You know, time to bring out a booger joke. You know, something. Got to get something in here.
So, speaking of boogers and poop, which we were just discussing, and that's my only note right now. Just says poop on my notes here. So, in all of your writing for the paper, and you're putting these books together, can you talk to us now? We're pivoting to writing questions for a second. I know we have some writing students who are watching, and a lot of people who are writers watching. So can you talk to us about where your editor said, I don't know if we want to talk about that, or like, how far can you go? Because you were the one person in the Sunday paper. I mean, I remember reading, or my mother would read your columns to me before I realized I could just read them myself and that she didn't have to read them aloud. And you were it was so transgressive, you know, for a 10-year-old boy to be reading the word poop in the Sunday newspaper. Can you talk to us about where you went up against, like where you towed the line, where an editor said, oh, don't write about that, or are you writing about this again? Anything, whether it's related to, bodily functions or something politically, anything like that?
I had a pretty good experience with that. When I started writing my column, this is again I started writing it in the 70s, but it was getting syndicated starting in the early 80s. And the big humor columnists at the time were Irma Bombeck, Art Buchwald, Russell Baker, a few other, Art Hoppe. I don't know if you consider Mike Royko a humor writer, but those people were very big, very successful columnists, and they all kind of had a niche. Art Buchwald was political humor, Irma Bombeck was domestic humor, and Mike Royko was Chicago. Excuse me. And I was younger than they were. But there was a time I was actually younger than other people, and that was that time. And I was coming from a different sensibility. It was like the baby boomer, this is a shorthand, Saturday Night Live-ish, National Lampoon, where a little bit more meta, a little bit more weird, a little bit more flaky, and a little bit more, poop and sex. And, so that was different. But at the time when I started doing that, that column, a lot of the people who were starting to get into positions of responsibility in newspapers were also my age, were, late 20s, early 30s baby boomers. So there was pushback. Yeah. I mean, some papers I enjoyed the pushback, to be honest. Sometimes that, some editors were like, we just can't print this. I think it's funny, but our readers will not be amused, And I went through a fair amount of that, but there were enough editors my age who encouraged me, and I had enough success getting into papers that I didn't ever feel like I had to change it. Now, obviously, when you write for a daily newspaper, there are things you don't do, come close to doing, the areas you don't write about, jokes you would not make, and that doesn't change that much. But for that time, mine was more out there than a lot of the others, but that basically worked in my favor. There were a lot of papers that were kind of looking to, to get that generation of people to read it. Right. So in the end, it worked out. And I can't say that I had battles occasionally with editors of other newspapers that are syndicated. So, a couple hundred newspapers are running your column. You got a couple hundred editors looking at it. And there were some that just, tended to not use every other one. And there were some that surgically removed all the punchlines, but for the most part, it was well received. And the editors I had, my own editors at the Miami Herald specifically were very supportive. And so I didn't have that problem. I was pretty lucky. I think it would be more difficult now, to be honest. I don't write a weekly column anymore. And I think it would be more difficult to get started now, not just because there's so much less space in newspapers, and newspapers are struggling so much, but because of, for one of the better term, political correctness, because of reader sensitivity. Everything you write now infuriates somebody, and sometimes it infuriates somebody who wants to get you fired or canceled or whatever. So I think papers are a little more reluctant now than they were back, believe it or not, 30, 40 years ago, to print things that might offend somebody. Because everything you write offends somebody. You know that. Everything you write offends somebody, especially if it's supposed to be funny.
What I write usually offends me most of all. So I'm fast. So your voice is so distinct. I could just pick a random paragraph out of your books. I would know it was yours, even if your name wasn't attached to it. And that's something that all writers are trying to do. They're trying to get the most sort of the purest expression of how they feel on the inside onto the outside. Can you talk to us about when you first decided, I'm going to write a funny column? Like, you're clearly a funny man. You probably have always been funny. At what point did you realize, I'm going to write something for a newspaper like this? Like, how did that transition happen?
Again, I was fairly lucky in that I never had to think too hard about it. When I was a kid, my humor idol was Robert Benchley, who nowadays, very few people even know who that is. But it happened that my dad was a big Robert Benchley fan and had a bunch of collections of Benchley's columns. And when I was 10, I discovered them and just read them all. And I just couldn't believe how funny it was. I didn't even get half the jokes. He was often referring to news stories from 1928, but I just loved the way he wrote. I loved that he was silly. And I love the way he would start a column about one thing and end on something completely different. Sometimes he would start a sentence on one thing and end up in a completely different genre at the end of the sentence, because he just didn't, feel constrained by any of the rules of composition. And I thought that was just great. and I wanted to write like Robert Benchley. That's really what I wanted to do. When I got to high school, we had a high school paper that came out, I think, exactly twice in my entire high school career, because the editor was a friend of mine named Tom Parker, only became the editor so that he could get into Yale University and say, which means he had to be able to put on his application that he was the editor of the school newspaper. They didn't mean he actually put out a school newspaper. But because he was my friend, he would put, I wrote, I think, one humor column when I was in high school, and I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. And then when I got to college, I went to Haverford College in Pennsylvania. Our motto is, we never heard of you either. And at least I proposed that, and they have yet to adopt it, but it was better than whatever their real motto is. And anyway, we had a newspaper, college newspaper, and I wrote a lot of columns for that, humor columns. It started out that the editor was a guy named Dennis Stern, who later became an editor at the New York Times, would assign me to do a story because I wanted to write for the newspaper. And instead of doing a story, I would just make something up and put it in. So he decided that I would be a humor writer, and I wrote these columns, which at the time I thought were just hilarious. Bear in mind, this is the '60s, and I later, at one of my college reunions, like 25-year reunion, I think, 25 or 30 year. I went back to Haverford, and somebody in the gym had put blow-ups of all my columns, because by then I was a well-known columnist, blew up my college columns in huge type and put them on the wall of the gym. I remember walking around reading them, and I didn't get any of the jokes. I didn't think they were funny at all. But anyway, I've completely forgotten what your question is. I'm now telling you how I became a writer. But I don't think that was the question. What was the question, Scott?
The question was, what was the motto of Haverford College? That was the original question. No, I asked you about, like, where do you, so I know a lot of writers, how'd you get to that? I'm going to write this humor column.
Yeah. So anyway, I was writing a humor column, and I was kind of vaguely thinking I wanted to be Robert Benchley, and that I wanted to write silly humor. I didn't want to write political humor. I didn't want to change anybody's lives. I didn't want to make the world a better place. I just wanted to write humor. I just wanted to make people laugh. And then I got a job out of college at a newspaper in Pennsylvania called the Daily Local News. That was the actual name of the newspaper. And in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And I was a real reporter there, but it was a small paper. And if you wanted to, you could write columns. You could write a column once a week. It was called Ad Lib. And I would write little ad libs that I thought were funny. But I was, again, just trying to amuse people, use my friends. I never, up to this point, had never thought of it as a career. And it didn't even occur to me that was possible. I thought I was going to be a newspaper reporter, real regular newspaper reporter.
Even though you weren't writing that kind of stuff for the paper, right? You weren't writing serious like journalism.
Yeah, I was. I was.
You were also doing that.
I was covering municipal meetings that are still going on. Okay. I mean, I was covering the world's most boring things for the Daily Local News. I would go to a meeting for the Downingtown Regional Sewage Authority, and I would write 58 inches about sewage, which subject I know nothing about, but what they were saying, and it would run in the paper. I'm sure nobody read it except maybe the members of the Downingtown region. But on the side, I would write this little, weekly. So then I left the newspaper business altogether and became an effective writing seminar instructor. And I taught business people how to write, because a friend of mine had a little business doing that, consulting business. So I was now, like, my days were spent standing in front of a group of engineers or accountants or computer programmers or chemists and telling them how to write simple, clear reports. That was my job. Not that they would ever write simple, clear reports, but my job was to tell them to do that and show them how they could do it if they ever wanted to in some imaginary planet where people who work for big companies would write clear letters to memos. But anyway, I then had lots of spare time. This was my job, and I was supporting my family. I had a kid at this point. I was supporting my family this way, teaching effective writing seminars. But I was still writing this weekly column for the Daily Local News in Westchester, Pennsylvania, for $23.50 a week. And I had no pressure on me at all. I mean, that was not how I made a living. They didn't care really what I wrote. I just wrote whatever I felt like. It was my humor column, my little humor column. And And that into my 30s was how my column was appearing. But the advantage of that, and this really is sort of an attempt to answer your question, was I never I wasn't in like some kind of hardcore journalism channel of career channel. I get a column job here, and then I could get a column job here, and then maybe I could get a column job here at the New York Times. I could be and I would have to be, if I were doing that, working at big newspapers, pleasing editors, listening to what committees thought I should be writing. Instead, I was off teaching writing seminars all over the country and writing in my hotel room, longhand on a legal pad, this little column that ran in the Daily Local News in Westchester, Pennsylvania. But that column eventually caught the eye of an editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer who ran some stuff for mine. Then it got the eye of some other Sunday newspaper editors, including the Miami Herald. And in a fairly short span there, in my early 30s, my column was running in enough papers that people started approaching me to write things, and ultimately offering me jobs to become a full-time humor writer. But the point is, if there is a point, I got to develop what you want to call my voice, kind of very organically, in a relaxed way, without ever having the pressure to, what's my voice going to be? And is that my voice? I just wrote what I thought was funny, and that became my voice. That became my column, and they liked it, so I just kept writing it. But nobody ever asked me to change it or anything different. So I was very lucky that way. But I do tell young writers when they ever ask me what I do tell them it's better to come up with something you think is funny than to try to think of something that you think somebody else is going to think is funny, because you'll come up with more things.
So what's interesting to me about your work is, when you write humor, you have some tricks, right?
Are you going to give away the tricks?
Well, I'm guessing. I'm just guessing. The cadence of the writing has a certain music to it. Punchlines get placed in a certain part of a sentence. But doing that for so many years and still, putting out books, do you find yourself feeling like you want to sound differently, or like, oh gosh, like I know there's going to be a joke right here? Or do you want to write a joke? You want to write a punchline in a place nobody's expecting it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think you're talking about the fear of have I done this before? Is this too much like what I always do? Is this too familiar? Is it too boring? Is it too expected? Yeah. Oh, thanks for bringing it up, Scott. Yes, I worry about that a lot. But in the end, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there are techniques that make things funnier. Like, I hate it when I have to try to, I refuse to go do seminars where you tell people how to be funny, because I don't think you can tell somebody. But I do talk sometimes about techniques of writing, and you're naming it. I mean, in writing humor, it's really critically important where you put the funny part. Generally, it should be at the end so that people can laugh. You almost never see a stand-up comedian tell a joke and you laughing and he keeps talking. He's letting you laugh, and you have to do the same thing when you write. And rhythm, as you say, incredibly important. You can't pause in writing the way you can in speech, and you can't inflect. You can sort of do it with capital letters and italics and some other techniques, but it's much more difficult to do so. You have to pay a lot of attention to how it flows and how it sounds and how it feels. And those things don't really change from piece to piece. So you will end up using a lot of the same techniques over and over again. But like Michelangelo, he just hit things with a chisel, right? And nobody ever said to him, "Aren't you tired of the chisel?" I shouldn't have picked him.
That's a good point.
He could paint too. So some other great artists who only could use the chisel, but was really great. I don't know where I'm going with this, but yes, I do worry. I do worry about what you're saying. I worry that I'm going to be repetitious. You just sort of have to hope that even though the technique may be somewhat similar or exactly the same, even you can come up with a new joke, a new idea. You be on a new topic, you go somewhere different with the topic.
What do you do? So, when I'm trying to write a funny story, I want them all to be funny, and I don't always feel funny. I feel funny less often than I feel very funny. And so, I'll have these things I try to do to inspire myself or to get myself thinking about something else, take a walk or whatever. What do you do if you have to turn out some words that are funny and you're not feeling it? What does Dave Barry do?
Snacking.
That's a great idea.
I'm a big snacker. I don't think we've done enough to thank the people who make Cheez-Its for what they've done for me,
for America, and you, and literature, really.
Literature in general. Cheez-Its. I think Dostoevsky would say the same thing were he here. No, yeah, you describe, I believe, the typical state of the humor writer. Really, every writer I know, but especially humor writers, you don't feel funny. You rarely feel funny. That's a myth that writing humor is in any way enjoyable or pleasant. I'm not saying it's coal mining. It's harder than coal mining because they know where the coal is, and we don't. We don't know where the coal is. No, but I apologize to coal miners because it is what they do. It's much harder and more useful than what I do. But when you're trying to think of jokes and you don't have any in your mind, which is the normal state.
Yes,
absolutely normal. I mean, you run out of jokes when you're like 11 years old, and then from then you're struggling. So what I do, this is so, is a boring answer, but you sit there and stare at the screen and keep trying and try and write a sentence and then erase it and write another one. And eventually something shows up. I'm never sure exactly how, but I've long been convinced that writer's block, the big thing that everybody always talks about in fear, isn't really that you are blocked by anything. It's the normal state the writers are in, is writer's block. But people who have to make a living at it just keep going, whereas a normal human would just say, this is too hard. I'm not going to do this. I have nothing to say. What am I doing? And writers, I got to think, because most writers, honestly, most good writers generally think whatever they're writing is terrible. That's like a normal state, or certainly it's not as good as something else they wrote or something else they read. It's a very normal state.
You've written mostly nonfiction, but you've also written, how many comic novels have you written? I know at least one.
I wrote, let's see, I wrote 3, he said, holding up, I think 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote Big Trouble, Tricky Business, and Insane City. Those are 3 comic novels I wrote all by myself. Then I wrote one called Lunatics with a lunatic named Alan Swibell. And I've written a whole bunch of kids' novels with Ridley Pearson. But 3 adult comic novels I've written. I'm actually writing one now. While I'm during this conversation, I have another computer and I'm writing a novel on it. That's how good I am.
And you make it look so difficult.
I'm just using my left hand. With my right hand, no.
Have you ever been approached? I'm sure you have, to write TV, to do a screenplay. Like, can you tell us about that? Who came to you? What did they want you to do?
Well, I think you're familiar with this process. It's every single comedy cliche about how horrible it is to try to write for the movie people out there on. I'm pointing toward Los Angeles. Every single cliche, every horror story is true and probably understated. I end up with these phone conversations with, rooms full of people that I never see, who I think are all about 17 years old. And we talk about their ideas for what I need to write. And then I try to write it. And then they talk about what they loved it. They always start with, they loved it.
Yes.
Loving it is the lowest form of praise. And then you end up changing everything because they loved it so much, and to make them love it even more. Anyway, I hate it. I really hate it. I've written some screenplays. I actually had a book made into a movie, which was wonderful because I didn't do anything with that. They just did it. But almost all my experiences have been just, a lot of talk on the phone. Nothing ever gets made. Sometimes I get paid something and sometimes I don't, but I can never tell whether there's any connection between that and what happened. I know that's where the glamour is, but I'd really happier just writing a book with my name on it and sending it into a publisher that eventually turns it into a book. That's somehow much more satisfying to me.
Yes. How has the book publishing and promotion and book tours, how's that changed since you've been doing it? Because we're doing this through some sort of magical space technology now, like we're on the Today Show. I mean, this is a whole new thing, but how has it changed in your career? How's it different?
Well, it's a lot more online now. The public, they don't really want to send you around on book tours anymore the way they used to. So like you start getting these emails from the publishers saying, well, we need you to do this on Instagram and do this on, I don't even know how Instagram. I had to ask my daughter. It was like really sad. How does that work? What is that? But they want you to do lots of social media things. And they want you to do things like this. Although I think if it weren't for COVID, I would be in Savannah, I think right now.
Mm-hmm.
I actually am in Savannah, but I'm not allowed to tell you that because of COVID. I'm not in Savannah.
I was going to say, I'm in your house right now.
It's coming from in there. But it's much more virtual, much more social media is the big change. Also, I think, like the whole publishing business, the kinds of book they want, I think have changed a lot. I feel really old and out of it now in the publishing business. I'm glad that I'm old because I don't have to figure it out.
Well, what kind of books do they want? How is that different now?
They want books that sell hundreds of millions of copies. They want a book that's kind of like Twilight and Harry Potter and 50 Shades of Grey.
Sexy Elf.
Yeah, that's what they want.
That's actually the name.
Billion copies. They just don't know which. They want another book like that. They just don't know who's going to do it.
I'm working on a children's book now called Sexy Elf. And I think it's going to do really well. So you're on Twitter. How long have you been on?
I identify as an elf, so I don't think that you'll be allowed to do that.
Well, I shapeshift, so.
Okay, then you're good.
How long have you been on Twitter?
Oh, I don't know. I was like 10 years ago, Twitter.
You're very funny on Twitter. Do you enjoy that? Like even just when you are sharing, retweeting something weird that you found, like you retweeted Kanye conceded not winning and what did you write? This changes everything. Is that a part of your daily I'm not going to write, I'm just going to go on Twitter routine?
No. I made a vow that I'm not going to ever try to think of something to tweet. So if something if once a month I'll think of a line, I'll think that might be funny on Twitter, and I'll tweet that, and as you say, I'll retweet stories from time to time. They strike me as funny, but I don't want to waste one more minute of my life writing tweets. Because it's hard enough to write things that I actually am going to be happy with, or going to be still have around years from now.
So it's just about time to take questions from strangers on the internet, which I know this will be fun. But before we do that, is there anything you'd like to read from this new book? A passage, a section, anything that you'd like to share with us?
No, not really. There's one thing I want to point out about the book because it's sort of unexpected. The end of the book is completely different from the whole rest of the book. Mm-hmm. There's an epilogue to the book that wasn't actually in the original book as I wrote it. When I wrote the original book, and it was all done, it was edited, it was in advanced readers' copies had been sent out, and a book tour had been planned. I was ready to go on book tour, and my daughter got sick. She was paralyzed. She got a rare disease called transverse myelitis. And I want to stress right now that she's fine. She recovered and is in Duke now. But it was a pretty awful few months, and it changed my life. I mean, that's melodramatic maybe, but it's true. And I really felt that if I was going to write a book about things I'd learned from my dog and not talk about the most important thing I'd learned ever since I was born, vaguely related to Lucy, but it just that it came along when this book was coming out. So I wrote this last chapter's epilogue. And I just say that because sometimes it sort of comes as a surprise to people. The last chapter of this book is not funny at all. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be depressing either. In fact, it probably has the only use really closest I come to an original thought in the book. But I just always want to let people know that it's there. So.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's a beautiful chapter, and it doesn't stand out at all as being different in kind from the rest of the book. The spirit of it's there. It's a fantastic end to this book. So I can commend it to the readers out there. It was a really, and it has some punchlines in it too. It's not
a few, yeah.
It's not dour. It's still, it very much feels like you. And it feels like a gift in this book, and kind of unexpected. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
So we have one question here. Well, I think this is for both of us. All of these questions are also for me, just so you know.
That's cool.
Well, it's asking what kind of dogs do we have, and you talk a little bit about this. Can you talk about some of the breeds of dogs that you've owned over the years?
Yeah, my first dog was a poodle, a standard poodle.
Yes.
And then I had a dog named Herbie, and I would say it was like an aircraft. Basically, Herbie was part Labrador and part aircraft carrier. It was a very, very large dog, terrifyingly large dog. We lived on a one-lane road, and cars would sometimes turn around and go back down the road rather than try to get past Herbie. He was so big. He looked scary, but he was a really nice, sweet dog. Then I had two dogs that I wrote many columns about. Ernest, a large Maine dog named Ernest, and a small emergency backup dog named Zippy. They were both mutts. And then Lucy is, we actually got her tested, and she's like a Boxmation Chow Retriever, Boxer, Dalmatian, Chow Chow, and Retriever, according to the DNA people. Yeah. She's a rescue dog, Anyway, they're all wonderful dogs. What kind of dogs do you have?
Well, my dog is Gary. He's a chocolate lab. We think he's mixed with a horse, just based on the size of his bowel movements. We do have a reader here who's asked if we can meet Lucy tonight. So if Lucy's hovering somewhere around,
let me see if Lucy's. Let me just hold on. I'm going to get into here. Michelle, if you're there, can you bring Lucy back to the office if you're around? Okay. Michelle, my wife, Michelle, will attempt to bring Lucy back here, and in this door will come Lucy if all goes well. Okay, I might have to get up and go let her in.
All right. We'll have to stop when that happens. So as a lot of people watching know, you're in a band, the Rock Bottom Remainders, the greatest rock band not in the Hall of Fame. If what instrument would Lucy play if she was in the Remainders?
Well, it would have to be some kind of wind instrument. Here's Michelle. Lucy, she's a fairly flatulent. Well, she's in the pool right now. A lot of people get worried about this. Our dog goes into the pool to drink. She won't swim, but she drinks the pool. And she's been doing this for 12 years now, and she's very healthy. People always worry about, isn't that bad for the dog to drink chlorine? I'm thinking I should drink more of the pool because here she comes. Hey, come on, Luce. Can you see her?
Oh, look at this. There she is, Lucy. Oh, that's so special.
She's going to go maybe lie on her bed. This is way past Lucy's bedtime. Lucy, well, okay. She's just looking out to see what's going on. If she does anything, I'll let you know.
She's big. She's a big dog.
She's 90 pounds of muscle and love.
All right, here we go. This is a great one. Can the Savannah Book Festival get the Remainders to perform at our next festival?
Well, it's highly unlikely because we don't. And you say that like it would be a good idea, and trust me, it wouldn't. You've never heard our band. We have played. The last place we played was a book festival in Minneapolis, but it's like such a big undertaking to get this whole band together, and then we stink. Well, you feel like we have a lot of fun, but if the audience has been drinking a fair amount, and I understand Savannah is that kind of town, so it might work out. It might work, but you really don't want to hear us sober.
Well, I love how you say in the book that you don't rehearse, but you do send a lot of emails about when you should rehearse.
Right. The standard way a band does this is they rehearse the song ahead of time. And we like after the gig, that's musician lingo. After the gig, we go, we should have rehearsed, but it's too late then.
That's too oh, there's she's sitting down.
She's just going to now groom herself for the rest of the night.
She
spends a tremendous amount of time grooming.
All right, so we have a question here from Bob. Bob wants to know, Dave, what's in the glass, gin, vodka, or tequila?
This is ice water.
It's pool water. It's chlorine pool water.
I have learned over the years, there's one of the great myths about writers is that they can be hard drinkers and they can drink with one hand and type with the other. And I can just assure any young would-be writers out there that if you do that, your writing will be crap. Likewise, if you do a thing like this, what we're doing right here, Harrison and I, and you've had something to drink, it'll be obvious, not in a good way is what I would learn over the years.
Okay, so we have a question from Lisa. Is it me, or are more people humor impaired now than when you wrote your closed caption column, one of my favorites? Are there any newly discovered treatments for this disorder?
First of all, you're absolutely right. We've just lost our sense of humor. I think people still have a sense of humor. They're just afraid to use it more and more. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say there's no injustice in the world, and that there aren't genuinely offensive things that people could say that could hurt other people. But I do believe the pendulum has swung an awful long way in the you can't say anything direction. We deprive ourselves of one of the joys in life by, we can't make fun of anything. And I don't know what's to be done about it. The last year, 4 years politically have not been great for our sense of humor, I don't think. Everybody's so angry all the time. Maybe we can calm down a little bit and just not assume that everybody's, horrible. It might help a little bit.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, I feel like if you can write something funny that somebody can laugh at no matter what their politics are, that's a victory.
Yeah.
Right.
And also if we could get to the point where people could go, well, I don't think that's funny, but somebody else might, so
right.
If I don't think it's funny, that doesn't necessarily mean it's horrible or, the person who said it shouldn't be allowed to say it or no one should ever be allowed to laugh at it. That's where we get just because then, as I say, it's at some point, nobody can say anything anymore.
Well, when I'm doing a reading, I like to tell people, because there's always somebody at a humor reading who's they're doing this.
That one. Make me laugh. Yeah.
I'll tell people, if they find something not funny, they should definitely not laugh. Like that's, and then anything else they can laugh.
Their faces break and wreath smiles, and you're friends for life, right?
That's right. No, we hang out. We hang out after the show. It's great.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. You talk about your shyness and the challenges in social situations. Has this virtual format for appearances made things easier or more difficult?
I definitely think more difficult. And this is like sort of a mechanical thing, but humor works much better with a live audience. I'm sure Harrison would agree with that. You rely on all kinds of feedback from your listeners, not just outright laughter, but body language and facial expressions and everything. Yes. It's a relationship. Telling a joke is and trying to be funny is. And it's just so much harder in this context. Now, the shyness, I believe it or not, I am kind of like in ordinary social situations, I'm not that outgoing. I am here because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And if I were to be doing a book event, same thing. But I don't find this nearly as comfortable as just seeing people,
Yeah. So when you're out in public and people know who you are, and what I'm just throwing this question in here. What are some things that people assume about you that are not true when you're interacting with readers?
One thing is they seem to assume that I'm always working on a column. Like if I'm at the supermarket, standing there in the cereal aisle, trying to decide which size box of Special K to get, I'll sometimes feel somebody looking at me, and and they have this look. Are you going to write about this? No, I'm just. So I think one misconception is that you're always writing. The other is that you're always on. That if you're a humor writer, you're just like some kind of. And that's not true of humor at any level. Humorists are generally not outgoing, funny people, except for when they're performing. If you want to meet a group of really sour, unhappy people, talk to stand-up comics when they're not doing stand-up comedy. It's just like insecure, which is why they're doing it. And they're brilliant people, a lot of them, but they're just not happy, funny, wacky. They're not going to waste their energy and good jokes on anybody, but they can wait till they're in front of an audience to do it. So I think I'm a funny person, and at least mildly amusing in real life, but I don't go around the house making jokes all the time, or my wife would have shot me by now.
Okay. Do you periodically go back and reevaluate yourself by the report card that you closed the book with? And that question is referring to at the very end of the book, you talk about how you measure up against these lessons.
Yes, I do. It's weird that it's the only thing that I actually do to better myself. But what'll happen is something will remind me. Like one of the lessons in the book is that you should keep in touch with your friends. Something that I've been very bad about. I think a lot of guys are bad about. And there's a guy I mentioned in the book, a friend of mine, Rob Stavis. I talked about when I wrote that chapter. I called him up just to talk, something I had not done in a long time. And we talked and did it a few times. And he called me not too long ago and said, you stopped calling me up after you wrote your book, And I thought, I had. So I got back to that. So I try to go through, and some of the things are easier for me than others. But I try.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that's good. All right. So one viewer wants to know, did you and Sophie get your puppy?
Not yet. The Sophie is now that Lucy is 12. And as you can see, very active.
She's moved from the window over to the bed.
She's over in her bed now, grooming herself in her bed. Sophie and I are convinced that Lucy needs a younger sibling to keep her young and also to mentor, because Lucy has a lot to teach. And Michelle is was hard enough to convince to get one dog. She's very skeptical about two. So we're really still kind of stuck on that. Sophie went away to college and got involved with a dog psychiatry program. So she has dogs to hang around with now. So it's not as critical for her, but I'm still pushing for a puppy, but we don't have one yet.
So this is a question about Sophie from a viewer named Wyndham. And you've kind of answered this. And she just asked how your daughter's doing. Did she end up going to Duke as a member of the class of 2022? You said that she is at Duke right now, right?
Yeah, she got to Duke. Duke was so great because Sophie got paralyzed 2 days before she was to leave for Duke. And so while all of her friends were, starting college and she's seeing all the, the Instagrams and stuff like that, Sophie was in intensive care with all kinds of tubes in her, which was really brutal. And one of the worst parts was that she thought she was going to miss out on Duke, but Duke held a spot for her and let her get back with her class half a year late. And she's caught up, basically. She's worked really hard. She's doing great, and she loves Duke, and she's happy. And it's funny, I used to hate Duke. I hated Duke, and now I love Duke and send Duke huge amounts of money.
And that makes them love you.
They love me so much.
Well, you've been so sweet and kind to tolerate all of these questions and to share these stories with us about Lucy, about your family, about your writing career. I want to thank you as a member of the Savannah Book Festival community. You are much beloved here. Whenever we have our next festival where we're inviting guests. We want you to be here. We want you to come. We want you to bring all the dogs that you find on the way. We would love to have you here in town. We love to throw a good party here. We won't be weird. We will be weird. But it'll be like a normal kind of weird that you like, that you're good at.
Weird. Good weird.
It'll be a good weird. This has been great.
This really was my play. I really did enjoy this. And you know that sometimes you say that, but I actually mean it this time. I enjoyed it. Harrison, you were great.
Thank you.
Questions were great too. And this has been fun. So yeah, I'd love to come. We've actually stopped in Savannah on the way to taking Sophie to Duke. Yeah. And what a great town. So we'd be back.
Yeah, I saw you when you drove by. I saw you guys when you drove by. So thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank everybody who's watching. Thank you guys for logging in and watching this. If you're here in Savannah and you're interested in adopting a pet, you can check out One Love Rescue or Renegade.
Available. There she is.
That face. Oh, she's like a ghost dog with the white.
I know. Anyway,
so One Love Rescue, Renegade Paws Rescue are both in town, and encourage viewers to check those out. And also remember to join us at the Savannah Book Festival again here on November 21st for John Connolly and James Lee Burke. And you can go to savannahbookfestival.org for updates, registration information. And that is it. Good night, Dave. Good night, everybody. Go pet a dog. Bye, Lucy. We'll see you guys later. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.